przededniu polskiej prezydencji porozmawiamy o perspektywie biznesowej, ale nie tylko tej polskiej, ale i europejskiej.
A naszymi gośćmi są Cyril Shiver, President of Mid-Europe Region at MSD, and Justin Gandhi, Managing Director at MSD Poland. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank
morning.
you for having us.
Yeah.
The fact is that Poland doesn't spend too much on health. We have to negotiate sharply the prices of innovation drugs. New therapies takes a relatively long time to be reimbursed. Is it really worth the hassle deal with us? From your perspective?
That's for sure. It's definitely extremely important to us what we do in Poland. If you allow me, what we do in each and every country in Europe is important. I was on Monday I was in Vienna. Today I'm here in Warsaw with you. In a few days I'm in Belgrade. I mean, that's what we do as an organization every day, is striving to make our medicines and vaccines available to patients. And it's particularly important in Poland, Poland being the 5th largest country in Europe. You've painted through your question with a little bit of humor, also a relatively provocative, I would say, statement. And at the same time, I think Poland is on a journey. Mm-hmm. It's true. It's true that there are a number of challenges in terms of availability of medicines and vaccines, increase of budgets to allow greater care, but it's continuous progress. And I think that's the most important. Over the last 10 years, we've seen significant progress. And whereas Poland has always been the 5th most populated country in continental Europe, it's not been the 5th largest pharmaceutical, if you want, market, but it is going to become. If it continues on the current trend, it is going to continue to become.
Okay, so but as Clara said, we have to sharply negotiate our prices because we are not a wealthy country and we do not spend so much GDP as other European, particularly Western countries. So it's worth the hassle. That was the question because you said that we have many patients, so that's the most important thing, that we are populated country, despite having the prices that have to be kept low.
Yeah. You know, medicines and vaccines are one intervention, along, as you very rightly say, a whole journey that patients go through, from prevention to screening to delivering of care, whether with physicians in town or whether at hospital. The challenge, and we see it in the news over the last days, even for the government, is one where they need to think through both how do they raise investments for healthcare professionals and how do they raise investments for medicines and vaccines and other technology. So I think it's that combination that is one where we see whether Poland or other countries struggling sometimes with really being able to increase enough the investment. So we advocate for it to be done across that chain, because you need to have healthcare professionals. You need to be able to train them, to hire them, to be able to deliver care. In the same way, you need innovative medicines and vaccines. So it's that combination that I know Poland is, like a few countries, struggling with, but I also see the progress. And that's why we have some concerns, but at the same time, I would say we have also some optimism.
And I think, for sure, to your question in terms of negotiation, is in every country, because that's, there are impacts on budgets and everything has to be concerned. But because of that, and due to that, you can't walk away from a country like Poland with a population.
Sure.
And I think even from our local perspective, like Cyril said, is that we've seen a lot of progress. We've seen this uptake. There's still a journey to go, but we've seen how this has changed over the last few years. And I think the big struggle now is not just about the negotiation, but it's making sure that all the citizens, 38 million people, have got access, because we also see in certain towns and cities where there's a better versus some of the others. So as much as we're trying to get the whole of Europe, as Poland, we still have to look and say, how do we make sure that every Pole gets the same? And therefore, it's not even a question of walking away. To say, so what do we need to do? How do we need to be innovative? How do we need to look at the long-term impact of what these negotiations actually do? How do we make sure that the value is actually carried on and passed through to each patient? Because us being an innovative company, bringing these new drugs and innovations and vaccines, we really believe that they would have the most positive impact. And it's not just about a budget, but about every single patient for us.
But at the end, it's always the budget also.
Yeah, and region-wise, how would you say Poland compares to, for example, Hungary or Czech and Denmark or Norway? Because in Poland we try to say, or France, right? We like to say, oh, there's certain things in France that are great that doesn't work in Poland, and for example in Scandinavian countries. So how would you say, like, Poland, where it stands right now?
Data, if we use data and examples for it, stands a little below the average. Okay, and from two aspects. One that you touched on, which is the time that patients need to wait to have availability of some of the medicines that are approved by the European Medical Agency. If you look at the average in Europe, it's a little bit in excess of a year. It's more in Poland.
Yeah.
It's less in countries like Germany, France, the Nordics that you mentioned. The second is, out of 100 medicines that are approved by the European Medical Agency, around 50% eventually are available to healthcare professionals for use with their patients. So that's the second challenge. You know, never say that 100% need to be available, and by the way, 100% are not available across Europe. And that is the choice of agencies that decide in every country what do they believe is most important. Definitely, we believe that more should be made available to patients in Poland, because if you take a number of areas where we see tremendous progress, like cancer care, you more and more talk about personalized care. And personalized care requires for physicians to be able to use different medicines, different technology to be able to deliver that care. And if they only have part of them available, they can't deliver optimal care. So that definitely is an area of progress for Poland.
And if we touch just more on in terms of the budget, we have seen this significant increase in the budget over time. But to your point, when you compare it to the GDP, and when we look at the other countries that you've mentioned, it's far greater than what we're doing here. So therefore, it shouldn't just be a comparator of increasing the budget year on year, but really saying, as the patient pool is growing and as patients are getting older, what type of intervention and how much budget should be putting behind that. Because obviously when you compare it to GDP, that is where Poland is lacking. So as much as we see an increase, which is fantastic, we've seen this growth, it's just not matching the GDP that the country is growing and the needs of the country with the innovation that should be here.
We're currently struggling with the issue, for sure.
Yeah.
We are struggling with this, and also we are struggling with the budget on health. Now is the situation, it's really difficult, and it should be also have an impact on the
the situation is carries some concern. We see it, we hear it from both hospitals and healthcare professionals. It's always a challenge when governments have real questions around how do they close the year. And we're in October and we're not exactly sure what's going to happen in November and December. So it is it's never easy situations. I'm sure that some solutions will be found, because at the end, maybe pragmatism,
some solutions better or worse.
But also the situation, geopolitical situation is changing now, and it has an impact also for the situation in Europe.
Yeah, for sure. We are recording just before the presidential election in the US, and this for sure can affect geopolitics and also the issue of drug security and safety. And Europe is between Asia and the US. How will the election of one of the other candidates affect the pharmaceutical market in Europe? After all, the US and Europe are still dependent of the supply of active pharmaceutical ingredients from Asia, and at least one of the candidates has bid to a trade war with China. I mean, continue the war, trade war. I think trade, maybe. I think.
To really have a focus on Europe. If you think of the EU 27, more than 450 million people, an innovative pharmaceutical industry that has significant investments in Europe, 50 billion research investments in Europe, close to 1 million employees, 3 times more if you think of the indirect impact. So, let alone the dynamics between Asia and the US, Europe is in itself a strong continent. Now, is it strong enough? Do the policies and the regulation really enable the competitiveness that we believe we should have? No. Not to the level that we think it requires if you look at some of the dynamics you just talked about. And that is all the goal of the EU pharmaceutical legislation review that is happening at the moment. This review is so important because, let alone the technicality of it, what European policymakers are trying to achieve with the broader ecosystem, and we're one of the stakeholders on that broader ecosystem, it's a few things. One is, how do you ensure that patients, whether they live in Poland, in France, in Bulgaria, have access to the broadest and most equitable, I would say, delivery of care? The second is, how do you ensure that the industry and the continent is competitive? And that you have research competitiveness, but also manufacturing.
Sure.
Competitiveness and resilience. And we've learned a lot through the COVID crisis. And I think that's where, and that's what we advocate, we need measures to balance, if you want, the interests of all of the stakeholders in that broad ecosystem. And we need incentives for research. If we look at 20 years back, Europe and the US were investing in research relatively the same level. The gap today is in excess of 20 billion. So it's an error, I do believe, to think that short term it's about maybe adding even more fiscal burden on innovation. On the contrary, I believe we need to favor more innovation so that we invest in the continent and make it as competitive as possible, and eventually that creates growth and better care for patients.
Pharma package seems like a difficult consensus to achieve because it has to manage the interest, I say, of innovative companies and generic ones, and EU is in the point that they have to manage those countries that depend more on generic drugs and want to be able to pay for those innovations, and those innovative companies, as you said, have to have business incentive to make those innovations, which is like normal thing in the business side.
I think you're making a great point. Now I would say, and I would never oppose the innovative industry and the generic industry. I would never oppose them because the model that enables to improve care and ensure that care is sustainable is one where you have the right incentive for innovation to generate progress, and at the same time you have the right incentives to build and ensure, that those medicines become affordable and largely available as intellectual property falls into the public domain. So both go together. And I think that's where I see Poland as having a great opportunity, because Poland has both an important generic industry with some local companies, with manufacturing. And Poland is increasingly a country where there's a lot of research. And Justin can talk about it and what we do here and generally. There's a lot of also publication, not only clinical research, but also more fundamental research. So things are changing. The way Europe is changing, the way we were saying some countries like generally in Eastern Europe and where Eastern Europe and Poland is today, for me is a big source of optimism. And this is where the future EU presidency of Poland is so important, because Poland can be a driver of an agenda which is about both innovation and manufacturing.
But it's very idealistic. What are you saying about the cooperation between the same? Of course, it's the same goal about the patient, but it's not the same goal about the business. And for example, if it was so easy, it wasn't the discussion about the intellectual property.
You know, you need to take a little bit of a step back between sometimes what appears to be good ideas, maybe false good ideas. If you think about our industry on the research and innovation side, we're in a high risk industry. If you think about our research cycle, when we on average have 10,000 molecules synthesized in a lab, 1 to 2 will eventually make it through the entire development plan to the patient. So I think that there is a need to reward innovation with the appropriate intellectual property is one where, and we've seen it through some of the conversation in Parliament, where some of the propositions that came were not for fundamentally changing it. They're different, dynamics there, but overall the idea that you need to have solid intellectual property, I think, is recognized by a majority. You always have some that would say do less, some that will say do more. We think it has to be one that enables the appropriate incentive, and what we think is that the way EU has shaped intellectual property today is one that allows, pretty decent incentives. If it goes down, we think that Europe is only going to eventually lose. Because if, again, 20 years back, Europe was among the lead in terms of new development. Today, it's US, China, Europe. So if you reduce it even further, how can you really then claim?
Yeah, but we are trying to predict the future, but we don't know how will the business itself change, because you say that pharmaceutical companies, innovative ones, are great when it comes to managing and assessing risk, because as you said, you have many clinical trials and only 1% of those clinical trials goes into a product itself, and it's sold on shelves. I think if the pharma package wouldn't go your way, I'd say, just to simplify, I think that innovative companies can still manage this risk, right? There could be some consequences, less innovation, maybe less opportunities for researchers to try their own ideas. But still, innovative companies are changing. Though you have cost-effective measures, you have artificial intelligence, which will have significant point when it comes to innovation. So is it really that much of a problem when it comes to shortening the IP rights for innovative drugs?
In all honesty, it would be a major problem. A major problem from two aspects that I believe whether politician or generally the population may not necessarily understand as much as we would hope they would. First of all, it takes more than 10 years to develop a medicine. And once successful, for the few that are successful, what you discover is eventually protected for less than 10 years. So that balance, if you think about it, doesn't seem to be hugely incentivizing us. It's already very balanced. If you say, I'm even going to reduce it further, you run essentially two big risks. One is you're only able to, allow me, and I'm afraid I'd be a bit technical here, you're only able to amortize the investments that you've made on less years. So what's going to be the immediate impact? You're going to try and raise the price.
Yeah.
The second is today,
Or lessen the extent of investing in other products.
that is a decision that politicians need to make. But if you think that today only a portion of medicines are available, I do not think that the population would want to see that percentage even reduce. But the second, and we read a lot about that in the news, you talked about the elections. The innovative industry today relies a lot on the United States to ensure that the investments that are being made are eventually sustainable, because we all know that prices of medicines are higher in the United States versus Europe. Increasing that gap won't be sustainable. So those are the type of really risks that are there.
Is it as hard to make an innovative drugs now than 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Is it still as
harder.
hard?
Yeah,
Or
it's
it
harder.
gets
It's harder.
a little bit easier when it comes to innovations?
What's interesting in the, if you think about the, how you progress science, is in many ways it's harder because what you're trying to solve for is harder. Where are we today? And some of the largest, areas of research in cancer, in neuroscience, those are areas that are extremely hard to understand and to crack because the biology itself is extremely complex. So you're absolutely right that we have technologies today that are far more advanced than 20 or 50 years ago. We start to be able to combine the understanding of biology with chemistry, with machine learning and technology. So there's a lot happening that should support and is supporting the ability to target new mechanism of action. But at the same time, the biology is so complex that what you're trying to achieve is far more complex. And the costs have therefore increased significantly.
So the technology can make the process itself more cost effective, even though the prices of workforce are going up. But it doesn't change the fact that we're still dealing with our biology, right? So we cannot compare it to, for example, when it comes to technology for smartphones or computers, when 10 years is like an area.
For sure, and to Cyril's point, if you're looking at technology in phones versus biology of a person, the more we're experimenting, the more we find out about how people work and how diseases work and how much more specific we get. Because it's not just about new drugs for new diseases, it's also to have less side effects. And to your earlier point in terms of the pharma package, this is the first time in 20 years that it's being reformed.
Yes.
And what we want to ensure, and like you said earlier, it's not about what we want, it's about making sure that whatever reform there is actually increases access for patients. And therefore, by saying on intellectual property, if that changes, how is that guaranteed that that'll actually increase access to patients? And then to your point of what is harder, one is hard in terms of, yes, you have technology to identify in the early stages from a chemistry perspective what the molecule looks like. But when you're getting further down the value chain and you start to look at clinical trials, those are becoming, to your point, headcount more expensive. Hospitals are more expensive. Physicians are more expensive.
Okay.
To find these patients actually run the trials. And like I said, what is the local part? So now the generic and the innovative industry have to work together. But on the one part, for example, in Poland, we have 3,700 patients on trials here. And that's not generic. That's originating new products, finding new diseases. That comes at a cost. And to your point is that you're now looking, 10 years ago it might have been $1 billion. Now you're looking at $2 to $3 billion just to get that concept. And it's not that you are having less success in clinical trials. That one or two molecules is right in the beginning phase. And therefore you have to screen through those 10,000 to find that one or two that then make it down. And that's where Poland is playing a very important role for us, with so many trials and innovation coming to the market, because we have to test it on the patients here to make sure it works here. And that's why, to your point on Europe, the focus is that we are testing to make sure that it's working for the European population. If you're using it in any other population, we can't guarantee, because back to the discussion on biology and how we are all different. And the personalized medicine, we respond different. We have different side effects. So we have to document that. And that's really what we're focusing on, to say, where do we go? And like Cyril said, when you're talking cancer and neurosciences, whatever you're curing for now, what does that cause next? Because everything has a knock-on effect. And that's where we have our responsibility. And that's why we also believe in the drugs and our process, because we have such a high level of that, to make sure that what we actually bring to the market is best in class.
But it's always the question how much the companies want to earn on this. But the Poland is not Denmark or France to be on side of the innovation companies. We are still dominated by generic companies, and so we care about their development. Every country plays their own games. France or Denmark are thinking about also not only about health, but also about the economy as a country. And in Poland is the same. It's not only health.
Denmark had to exclude their huge innovative company from GDP
Calculation.
Yeah.
I think if we take a stand back, each and every country, may have their nuances, but as a whole, each and every country is interested in driving economical growth and ensuring the availability of medicines and vaccines to their population. And therefore, that balance, I think, is one that is important to each and every country. And I wouldn't necessarily say that there's, totally opposing view. There are nuances around what is that ideal balance between different measures. But again, for me, opposing countries or opposing industry is not necessarily taking a view of what is right to drive economical growth across Europe, and in one of the most important countries being Poland. Because if we really talk about Poland today, Poland has the potential, and I really believe this, to become a major country when it comes to that entire innovation, I would say, spectrum. Why do I say this? It's because you've got very strong universities and education level. You've got renowned scientific leaders. You've got hospitals in which there are increasing investments, particularly university hospitals. So if you take, and I don't have the exact numbers, the last 10 years, the number of clinical trials, the number of publications coming from Poland have increased drastically. If you take an area like cardiovascular research, Poland ranks number 11 in terms of research publication in that field. I would say you want to have a strong local industry, and you want to have innovation. And they're not at all incompatible. Because macro level, and I'm sorry for being a bit long, macro level, 60% of the medicines available in Europe are generic, and they cost 30%. 30% of the medicines available are innovative, and they cost 60%. That's the balance. And that's a continuous cycle of driving innovation. The more we innovate, the stronger the generic industry will be.
I think the Polish officials know this, right? But we are at this point when we want to. I think that our generic companies want to be innovative. Our leader in generic drugs has a biopharmaceutical company, right? Spin-off, and want to be innovative, but we need to get them stronger. And then we can say that then they can compete with those in France or Denmark and Germany, but we are not in this position right now. So that's why I think Polish officials have this standpoint that they have.
Yeah, this is the, of course,
So
the discussion
yeah.
what is running on the European Union now, and also the topic what is come back like a boomerang. Like the discussion about the generic and innovation industry is also the prevention, and we launched a free vaccination program against HPV, but the effects are not yet satisfactory, most due a lack of awareness among parents.
It's really a great question that we could probably have a whole discussion just on the different elements that you would follow there. But to your point is that prevention and the earliest intervention you can do is always the most cost effective. And that comes from...
But everybody knows this,
Yep.
and what happened? Nothing.
So
Where is the problem?
No, so I would look, it's always about the funding behind it, and then it's about the education. So that's number one, is people need to be educated in terms of how to get screened, how to get diagnosed. And if you do that, we should change the mentality of when I find something, then I'll go to the doctor, because especially in cancer, you're going down the stages. And as you're going down the stages, obviously your overall survival, potential for cure will all change. So it's all sorts about the education of people, that they're aware of what they should be looking out for, and the screening programs. Even us here as a company are running our own screening programs, and we're actually finding much higher incidence just amongst our employees that is out there, which shows you that that's where you have to start. You have to start with the screening. And to your point is on the prevention, to Cyril's point is that we've seen a huge change even from September when it comes to HPV. We've seen increase in cohorts, but if you look at a beating cancer plan, that's where you need to put in, some people need to be held accountable to say, this is what we want to achieve. And if you really want to beat cancer in this arena, you need to get to 90%. Right now we're at 20%, we've increased cohorts, we see they're going, but there has to be an accountability for who takes on the education, making sure that parents are aware of how this can protect their children now and into the future, and that's the whole drive behind it. So how do we really work together? There's only so much we can do, there's so much the government can do, Ministry of Health and Education, and we've seen a lot of this activity. But at some point, there really has to be an ownership. And to your point, what do you need to do? This is still in its infancy, so it was great that it started. We are lagging behind. We have seen quite an uptake. We have seen a lot of focus. We have seen that on average, a person will hear about HPV 120 times here. So therefore, there is a lot out there, but something has to change culturally, and from a person to take ownership and to say, there is an early intervention that we can take. Because at the long run, when you're getting to cancer, the best part to cure cancer is to actually prevent it. So that's point one. And then if you do have it, how do you detect it earlier? Because the earlier you treat, the much higher potential success you have.
So if it's not only an educational problem, but also a cultural one, I'd say, so Ministry of Health should tailor the education program to our population.
The end is also the one big topic is the European health data space.
Oh yeah, my favorite one, EHDS. How do pharmaceutical companies want to take advantage of the opportunities that will open up when it comes to HDS? It is intended to create the conditions for the cross-border exchange of patient information, and also use of medical data to create innovation and provide healthcare services abroad. Do you have any plans for that?
But it's always the question about the patient data safety.
Yeah, so that's always a discussion, and I was part of a panel discussion with the Minister in Digital Technology, and that was always a question in terms of safety and what is out there. But I think to Cyril's point, if you take it one step back, is that yes, there's a European data strategy, and do we have a strategy? Our strategy is to get as much data about our drugs in the real world setting so that we can make the right sort of prognosis and where do we need to invest more. And I think the sad and the exciting part is that Poland actually sits on a lot of data. And we've basically had 2 reports released recently where we've used Polish data in both women's cancers and lung cancer. And that was from an independent institute from Sweden, where they came in and they checked and they showed this is what you have. Is that yes, there's some irregularities, and but it's data that you can work with and you have it. And to your point, you have it for 38 million people, and to say, right, what are the interventions that were introduced? What has the outcome been? And where do we need to focus more? And what is the difference? And instead of saying, first, yes, it's great that the whole Europe, but Poland needs to get it right. And actually, this is an area where Poland can say, well, this is what we've done, and present that and say, this is actually the case study. This is what it can look like, because you have it. I've been in some other countries that don't even have this type of data, where we actually you have to physically pay someone to go pull out their data.
Yeah.
You have it on your systems. It's literally just, there are solutions that you can plug and play and say, pull it out, and you can immediately start looking. So it is there, but it's that willingness to say, okay, how do we release it? How do we look at it? How do we develop dashboards to check the interventions that we're having, both from vaccination, HPV, treatment? Where's Poland going in the future? Where's the healthcare going in the future? Where do we have to intervene now to make sure that later there's the right expenditure? And to your point on the budget, that's the only way you can actually shape a budget, is to look at the data, where's it going, and where do you have to invest? Where do you have to strategically invest now, so that in the years to come, that your data and your expenditure is not a problem, because you've predicted this. Just by putting an intervention and hoping, hope is not a strategy.
So as a conclusion, we can say that EU is not that bad, because on the other hand, on one hand, they are trying to maybe shorten the length of IP rights for a little bit, but on the other hand, here's our data, make ourselves proud and make it worthwhile.
Yeah.
I think I was reflecting on some of the questions you just asked us today, and they're really great questions, because they talk about how do you, what are some of the challenges in Europe and in Poland. We talked probably a bit more about Europe, and I want to be sure we also share about Poland. Why are we passionate in a way about what we do in Europe? One is it's such an important continent, as you just said, for research and innovation. But it's also important also that we have manufacturing sustainability, because it's a large continent with 450 million people. And that's why, think about a company like ours, an American corporation. Europe is a very, very important piece of our company strategy. We have more than 25,000 employees in Europe, 12 manufacturing sites. 25% of the patients that are enrolled in clinical trials in our company are enrolled in Europe. So that's why leaders like ourselves are passionate about what we do in Europe, and that's why we advocate for thinking through, and very carefully around some of the measures that are taken, because I can only applaud the policymakers for saying, we need to revise the European pharmaceutical legislation that is largely 25 years old, and it's an accumulation of different legislation. Why do I applaud it? Because the goals are the right one. Make Europe more competitive, drive research, make medicines and vaccines available in an equitable and rapid fashion across Europe. This is what we strive to do every day. That's really why we always need to be careful between measures and tactical decisions.
Okay, I think maybe it's for the next time. A lot of subject to discuss, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dziękujemy bardzo.